The American eugenics movement was a time in the United States that very few people seem to know much about. For such extreme measures that took place in the United States during the 1900s, we never seemed to learn about it growing up in elementary, middle, or high school. This is why our group ultimately chose to pick this topic for our podcast. Due to a lack of recognition surrounding this topic, it's important to outline what the American eugenics looked like prior to evaluating some primary and secondary sources that involve the American eugenics movement. The central idea of the American eugenics movement was to create a better race of Americans through planned breeding and sterilization of those deemed unfit to further enhance the race. If this idea may seem similar, it probably is because it is eerily similar to what the Nazis aimed to do in World War II during the 1940s. In fact, it wasn't until the world saw the horrors of the Nazis regime until the United States eugenics movement officially lost steam, causing it to end. As committees such as the American Breeders Association began to form in the United States, research and development was done to examine how sterilization and breeding techniques could further enhance the human race by selectively breeding.
The primary source we selected for this podcast was a pamphlet produced by Birthright. Birthright is a nonprofit reproductive health center. When they released this pamphlet, there was a huge movement to sterilize what people called feeble-minded children. The thesis or idea of the pamphlet can be summarized by one quote from it. It says, "The law of nature says that only the fit shall survive. When a nation disregards this law by protecting the unfit and encouraging their multiplication, this nation invites inevitable destruction." Taking a look at the pictures of our primary source, you can see the significance of the eugenics movement in the United States. You can see here that the two categories for sterilizations are insane and feeble-minded. You can see the number of sterilizations up until 1945, and that number is 43,791. Overall, our primary source gives you an idea of the scope of American eugenics.
As we hop into our first secondary source, we see that the eugenics movement was able to gain traction due to some assistance from the media during the 1900s. In Rachel Grant and Christina Milan's Improving the Race, the discourse of science and eugenics in local news coverage from 1905 to 1922, they analyzed and observed this very idea. This secondary source looks at local newspapers that specifically come from the area of Columbia, Missouri, that integrated scientific discourse, aka the eugenics process, with questions about social and cultural makeup. The media discourse focused on three themes. The first was an idea called race suicide, and the second was elevating the superior race through purity and racial difference. The first theme of race suicide can be explained through a quote from the secondary source by President Theodore Roosevelt, as he talked about the fear of race suicide, which was the idea that the birth rate of white people, the fit, would dwindle into the point of extinction. The solution to this alleged crisis was the eugenics movement, and the media highlighted this under the theme of race suicide, which in turn caused white people to identify as being a superior race, which we see as our second theme. Because of this notion, the article examines, finally, in its third theme, how methods of sterilization and selective breeding endorsed by the media can create a more quote unquote pure race that would better mankind and would create a more successful version of America.
Next, we are going to look at a specific example of eugenics that affected California. The article is titled "Disproportionate Sterilization of Latinos Under California's Eugenic Sterilization Program from 1920 to 1945" and is written by Nicole Novak. She is a research assistant professor at the University of Iowa with a focus in community and behavioral health. Her article uses data from 1920 to 1945 to highlight laws and regulations that affected Latino people in comparison to non-Latino people. The article truly shows the brutality in this time for the United States. Although the eugenics movement is behind us, it still has implications on the world today. Novak says disproportionate sterilization of racialized minorities is an important historical backdrop for ongoing conversations about reproductive health, equity, and implicit bias and structural racism in healthcare. The article states California's eugenic law led to over 20,000 sterilization recommendations. Her study found that Latino men were 23% more likely to be sterilized than others, and Latino women were 59% more likely to be sterilized than others. Clearly, her research shows insight into racial stereotypes that have affected the U.S. Many of us have not heard of eugenics in America, and it truly is an important piece of our country's history that cannot be overlooked.
All right. So the secondary source we look at the pages of War Against the Weak, Eugenics in America's Campaign to Create a Master Race by Edwin Black. And it's kind of confronting us with the reality of one often obscured by the passage of time. Black reveals the origins of American eugenics, tracing its roots to the late 19th and in the early 20th centuries. It was a time of exploring social improvement. So through the lens of history, Black kind of reveals how influential figures like Francis Galpin and Charles Davenport propagated the ideology of eugenics, advocating for the improvement of human heredity through selective breeding. But what is more disturbing is how through eugenics gained institutional support with academics, politicians, and philanthropists rallying behind organizations like Eugenics Record Office and the Human Betterment Foundation. So as we kind of immerse ourselves in Black's narrative and what he's saying, we kind of confront the stark realities of American eugenics and the movements they had. So in the War Against the Weak, it kind of serves as a reminder of the dangerous, enduring legacy of American eugenics in American history.
It may be concerning that you are just learning about the American eugenics movement for the first time today. It is unfortunate that most, if not all of us, haven't heard about eugenics, especially because of how recent this was in our nation's history. It definitely remains a disturbing and overlooked topic. It is crucial that we as young people recognize this dark period of history so we are able to be more informed and compassionate in the future. By our generation being willing to confront uncomfortable facts about history, we can strive to build a better society for all of us.